Hello, friends of the paranormal. This is your co-host, Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist, Patty Wilson. Patty, how are you today?
Much better. I took a week off because I wasn't feeling too well, but I am on the mend.
We're all happy to hear your voice and see your smiling countenance.
Thank
So,
you.
I would say if you are first joining us, thank you for finding us. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Click the like button or the thumbs up or whatever metric that's on your platform. We have links down below in the description for our Facebook groups, and we have a couple of those. There was the previous incarnation, which we kept, and then whenever we kicked off this resurrection of the paranormalists, we started a new group as well. So they're kind of parallel there. Uh, we have the email address where you can send us your ideas, your thoughts, your feedback, and there's other links there down below, like Patty's blog, her books on Amazon, if you wish to read some of her collections that she's done so far. I know I have many of them. And with that, I believe that's all the things I needed to say. And now's where I say, what's our topic?
Well, our topic is truth is stranger than fiction. And by that, I'm going to do a little hodgepodge of stories that I found
Mhm.
really interesting, very unusual stories. And moving in towards Halloween, a few more really spooky stories toward the end of it, um, giving a little bit of interest in the subject of what happens in different countries for Halloween and some of their folk tales, which doesn't mean they're not true. So I wanted to read this little quote by Mark Twain. He says, truth is stranger than fiction, but it is because fiction is obliged to stick to the possibilities. Truth doesn't. And it's true. I mean, think
Mm,
about it. Like,
mhm.
people writing fiction, they try to make it plausible, but some of the most implausible things are true. So I wanted to start with a story that I've always found fascinating. I think because it's the most bizarre sounding creature I've ever seen in my life or heard of in my life. So there is a creature called the Enfield monster. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with it. And it is really an interesting story. So Enfield was this little tiny town in, I believe it was in Illinois. I want to make sure I'm telling you right. Illinois, yeah, Enfield, Illinois.
Okay.
And this was 1973. This gentleman who starts this whole thing, his name is Henry McDaniel, and he is a jeweler. So he's an average businessman, nice guy, kind of everybody gets along with him. He's got a couple kids. And Henry has this experience. He opens his door because he hears a noise, okay? And
Okay.
he's wondering what's going on. So he hears scratching sounds on his door that woke him up. And he goes out, he opens his door, probably thinking a bear or raccoons or something like that. And there between the two rose bushes, he sees this creature. And he said, with an almost human-like body, just as his kids had described. Now, he makes reference to that, and then later on in the story, they tell you that about 2 weeks earlier, his kids and some other little boys were playing baseball in the park, and they came booking it home, all breathless and scared to death, wide-eyed, screaming about this monster with 3 legs. And it looked like a man, but it had 3 legs and these big eyes that glowed. And they were like freaked out. And at the time, he had told his own children, you guys are using your imaginations. That's good, but you can't tell me it's true because that's a lie. And of course, the kids realized right away they weren't going to get believed, so they shut up. But on this night, Henry is out, facing this thing, and it's just what his kids described. So he said it had 3 legs, a short body, 2 little short arms, 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights, and it terrified him. So he ran back in the house, slammed the door, locked the door, ran back upstairs, grabbed a gun out of the dresser, went back downstairs, and this thing is still standing about 12 feet away from him by these rose bushes in his yard, and he pops off 4 shots. The first shot, he knows that he hit it. And he said the reason he knows he hit it was because it made this sound like, it was injured. And he said he calls the police as soon as this thing takes off running through the yard after he shoots it, right? The police come and they take the story down and they're like, Sir, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing here now. And he's like, no, no, look, it ran out through the brush there. It went down by the railroad tracks on that embankment. There has to be something. Well, the cops told him it was a dog. It was this, it was that. Except here's the thing. When the cops got to shining the flashlight where he said that he saw or heard the scratching, there were scratches, and they were about 6.5 feet up, as though something had reached up high, ripping at the siding of the house. They go out and they look in the rose bush area where it had originally been seen, and they find footprints, this bizarre series of 2 feet and a third foot in the middle. And they look like dog prints, except there's an extra toe. I know it sounds crazy. And well, then all the people, it makes the newspaper, and everybody's making fun of him. This is ridiculous. Their theories are coming up. It was a bear. It was a kangaroo. It was, all these different things. And like this dude was legit. Like he had retired from the military. He had been stationed in Australia. He was insulted by all of these people making fun of him. He knew it sounded ridiculous. But it was there. And people were like, well, how do you remember? And he's like, I have a photographic memory. You can check with the military. I have a photographic memory. It's one of the reasons I did the job I did. Over the next few weeks, he sees it on several more occasions at night, late at night, and it's digging at his house. So he calls the cops. Eventually, the cops would say to him, if you call us again, we're going to arrest you. And 5 or 6 other adult people report seeing it over that same span of time. Now, what it was, I don't know. But there were scratches on these houses. There was screen doors and screen windows that were ripped open with these big holes in them, as though something had put its, talons or whatever into them and ripped them apart. And nobody has any idea. There is one thing that I should say. So there was a 10-year-old next door who eventually fakes a sighting. But then when the cops talk to him, he admits he did it because he didn't like Mr. McDaniels and he wanted people to laugh at him. But the original sighting, he says he had nothing to do with. Other people says that he has nothing to do with it. His family says they can vouch for the fact that like at 1 o'clock in the morning, he was in bed. So with that said, there was no ending to it. It just stopped happening. There were 5 people arrested in town for shooting at it, discharging a weapon inside the city limits, kind of a deal.
Right.
And there were others who claimed to have photographed the animal, whatever it was, but nobody took them seriously. They said they were faked, so they just dropped the whole thing. So I don't know what it was, but what I do know is it's an interesting story. And things like this happen from time to time where you come across this thing and it just sort of appears for a few weeks or a few months and then goes away for quite a long period of time. And will it come back at any other time? I don't know. I mean, look at Jersey Devil stories. They come and go, like they'll fade out for 15 years and then the police chief of Philadelphia sees one. There was actually a story about that many years ago where he actually reported, a police chief reported seeing it flying over. He shot at it and he was so rattled he called to get backup. So I don't know what they are, but there's something weird out there going on. And I just thought that was an interesting story. I've never heard of any other 3-legged creatures.
I haven't either until now.
Yeah, and they actually have an artist's rendering of it. It's very odd. It's almost sloth-like with 2 legs and the one like coming out of its stomach and hunched over with little arms. And it's very odd looking thing. But based upon the description, somebody drew a sketch of what it would look like. So we're just going to do a couple of those stories and then move into the dark stuff. So this next story was about a phone number. Do you ever hear people say things like, I was born under an unlucky star, or such and such just happened to me, or ever since I got this, I got this address, or I got this phone number, or I got, this job, everything's bad luck. Well, sometimes there are things that seem to be bad luck. In Bulgaria, the mobile phone company there had issued a phone number to somebody that was 0888 888 888. That's their area codes and all that. Okay. Now,
Okay.
8 is supposed to be a really bad luck number. So the fact that this dude caught that number with all them 8s in it, it was like, like whenever you buy something and it's $6.66, and I don't know how people do it today, but like when I was a kid growing up, like everybody would buy a pack of gum or something to make the number something different because it was a bad luck number. So anyhow, this gentleman, his name was Vladimir Grasnov, and he was a healthy man, 48 years old, had a business and was doing really well. After he got this phone number, within a couple weeks, he was diagnosed with cancer and he died. And he just seemed just like slow, like start going downhill pretty rapidly. 2 years later, the number circles up around again. You cancel the number out and eventually it makes its way back up. And a guy by the name of Konstantin Dimitrov was given the number. Now, he was a mob boss and he was 31 years old. He had been doing this since he was a teen. He had been pretty good at it. He was having dinner with his girlfriend, and supposedly a guy walked in and started shooting and killed him. That one you might be able to just pass off. But it was interesting.
Kind of occupational hazard.
It just is interesting. It happened right as soon as he got that number.
Hmm.
The third victim was Konstantin Dishlov, who was shot while sitting in an Indian restaurant. Now, he was the owner of the number, had just gotten it, and he was known to be a businessman who was sometimes suspect and what have you. So he had a kind of a checkered past, if you will. But the minute it was like literally within days of getting the number, he gets shot. And so after this happened the third time, and then they were notified that 3 people who've had that number died within weeks of getting that number, the company decided to retire that number. So you cannot get that number at this point because it is a number that they have removed from service. So it was interesting that the phone company went to that trouble, is what I thought.
Well, I mean, if you're running a business, even if there's circumstantial evidence that something is bad luck or something like that, you are going to make it go away because that's bad for business. So I could see that happening. But you'd think that there would be people, skeptics or whatever, that would say, "I want that number." Yeah.
Yeah, I would have thought that too. And 3 people was enough. Like I mean, seriously. It was only 3 people, but I thought it was an interesting story because that was where they went to in their heads, the phone company, and it puzzled me. I mean, like if 20 people died in 5 years, I'd be like, maybe that is a jinxie number. Let's just pull it. But 3, and that was, and how the only people that could have put it together would have been the people from the phone company because they're the only ones who would have known.
Well, I think the phrase has been said before. There is no bad publicity.
True. That's true as well. So I just thought it was a really interesting little story because it was just so off the wall, if you would. So now we're going to wander to the Beasts of Tamgraney. Now, Tamgraney is in Ireland in County Clare, and there's a story there that took place on Halloween that I wanted to share. So the residents of Tamgraney avoid the woodlands around their little village and town around the time of Samhain, which is Halloween. Okay, they whisper stories that there are animals, beasts in those woods that they come out on Samhain. So the story is about a young man who didn't believe the stories and decided it was a beautiful fall day that he was going to go take a walk. So he takes a walk starting late in the afternoon. And as he's getting towards dusk, he's turned around, he's starting to head back. He gets this odd feeling, like part fear, part sadness. And he decides that he should probably get going. But he's got a stout stick that he's walking with, and he's pretty sure that whatever it is, maybe it's just the creepy feelings because in the back of his head he still knew the stories. So he turns back to keep to go around and get back home. But all of a sudden, the woods look different. He doesn't recognize them as the path he had just walked down, and there's no path there anymore. He couldn't find it. It was just gone. And then he started to think about the fact that it was coming to All Hallows Eve. This was the night before, going into the darkness before entering that. And he felt this terrible sense of dread come over him. The sky got very dark. The birds had stopped singing. There was nothing moving anywhere. And suddenly he sees the bushes shaking, and he sees a huge black dog come out of the bushes. And it turns when he makes a noise, it turns and looks at him, and its eyes were glowing red. And as he's picking up the stick, getting ready to prep because it looks like it's going to pounce, the dog just disappears, just fades away. Now he's really scared, and he's not sure what direction to go. He doesn't want to go further into the woods, but nothing looks right. Path is missing. So he's not quite sure what to do. And an Irish rabbit comes hopping out of the same brush, and it looks at him, and I don't know how a rabbit can look malicious, but it says malevolent. This rabbit looked with malevolent red eyes, its eyes glowing red, and then it darted into the foliage and was gone. And as he's looking around waiting for what's coming next, a cat came out, not a black cat, a big orange cat came out, and it hisses at him and spits and arches its back, and he can see its eyes are glowing red like the other two animals, and just as it's about to jump, it just disappears. Now he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't want to be stuck in these woods any longer than necessary. And off in the distance, in the murkiness, he can see two figures coming his way. One of them is a black ram, and as it gets closer, he can see that its eyes are red and its horns are sharp. And beyond that is a deer, a big buck. And this buck is caught, they're fighting, like battling, and kind of headed in his direction. And as they get closer, he can see the deer is mortally wounded, and it drops to the ground on its front legs, and it looks toward the man, and its eyes aren't red, and he realizes it's a mortal animal, and he picks up the stick with great anger because this beast is beating and killing this animal, this deer, and he starts to swing at it. And when he gets through his swing, he realizes he hit nothing, and the ram is suddenly gone. And suddenly something hits him, and he turns, and the ram is behind him. How it got behind him, he has no clue. And it hits him, and he falls to the ground so hard he knocks himself unconscious. When he wakes up, it's darkness, it's cold, it's damp, but the path is back. And it's clearly the path. So he quickly goes that direction. He gets home. It's the middle of the night, and he sits up the whole rest of the night. He's exhausted, he's achy, and it takes a couple days, but eventually he goes and talks to one of his uncles, and he says to his uncle, I had the craziest dream last night, or the other night. It was brought on by, I think, hitting my head while I fell in the woods. And he tells his uncle the story, and his uncle says, I don't need you to tell me where the forest is. It was Tim Graney. I have been there before. I know people who've had experiences like yours. It happens on Samhain every year. I don't know what it was, but it was like all these evil creatures just came out for that one night. And for those who don't realize, Samhain is when the dead are able to come back and walk the earth. And it is followed the next day, Halloween's followed the next day by All Saints' Day, when the saints are able to come back and they're celebrated. And so traditionally in many cultures, particularly Irish culture, it is believed that that these spirits come back and haunt the earth, particularly on Samhain, which is Halloween night. So I wanted to tell a couple more stories that were just really fascinating to me. I usually collect Headless Horseman stories, but I couldn't find enough to do a podcast this year, but that doesn't mean I won't keep looking. So this year we're going to talk about death coaches. There are so many cool stories in all these cultures about death coaches. Down in Philadelphia, there's this mansion that I know of, and the house is really badly haunted. It's been haunted forever, and it's basically a museum. to a large extent. The people that owned it were very, very wealthy. They were historical. They like in that they were related to like Thomas Jefferson and things like this. And
Oh.
so they have like a clock of Jeffersons and they have all these other things. And I've told the story about the blue chair in the place that was haunted and there's the death chair. But the
Mhm.
one thing that we never really talked a whole lot about that story is that there is a car. It looks like it's from that late 20s, early 30s, a big limousine type looking car, big old car, and it'll come up the driveway slowly and stop at the front door as if to pick someone up. And it has been believed by the family that this car picks up people and takes them when they die. And there are some stories of family members who have the car has arrived as kind of a harbinger of what is about to happen. The gentleman who owns it tells the story about his brother when they were kids. And they were looking, there's a big reflective pond in the entrance of this mansion. And the boys were standing there looking at their reflections in the pond. And the gentleman who owns it to this day, it was his brother. He said his brother's face just turned into a corpse face and it scared him. And then the car was heard, and then his brother died a couple days later. And other members of the family, when they die, the car appears and seems as if to take them off. Though nobody sees anybody getting in it, but it's almost like a harbinger. And that's an old theme. Like it goes way, way back in history where there's a horseman or there's a coach. So I wanted to talk about some of these death coaches. In Ballyduff, which is in Ireland, there's a gentleman by the name of Michael Noonan who told a story that was, I thought, fascinating. He was on his way, this was in the late 1800s. He was on his way to pick up a pair of shoes from the shoemaker, and he could hear what he described as the sounds of huntsmen and hounds in full cry. Now, that's a very loud sound. You got horses, thundering through, the dogs are baying because they're on the scent of something. And he knew that nobody should have been holding a hunt. There was no, they usually post it so that like people stay out of that area. You don't want to get run over by the horsemen and stuff like that. There was nothing like that going on. And then he said he heard the unmistakable clack, clack, clack of the mechanism working at the mill he was walking past called Hanlon's Mill. But Hanlon's Mill had been still for over 45 years. And it was as though it started up on its own. It scared him pretty bad because he didn't see anything. He could just hear the dogs and hear the horsemen and hear the baying of the animals. And then that mill starts working all by itself. He didn't see it moving, but he could hear the sound of that slow grinding wheel. So he takes off running. He ends up getting to the cobbler's place to pick up the shoes, and there he meets a friend named Darby Haynes. Now, Darby asked him if he wanted to help him do some deliveries because he was a delivery man. And it sounded like a real good deal to not be by yourself because he'd just had a creeped out
Yeah.
afternoon. You know what I'm saying? So he decides that he'll help Darby for a while. It takes him till just about dark. And they finish up, and he has to walk back past Hanlon's Mill.
Of course.
Well, because you had to go that way to get home.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
So the moon is full, it's bright, it's clear, it's a nice night. He'd worked all day. He was, all afternoon. He was kind of tired. And he says to his friend, Darby, could you drive me past Hanlon's Mill? I'm tired. I don't want to go by myself. And Darby's like, yeah, I guess I can. So he's sitting there and they're just letting the horse lead the way because the horse knows how to get back that direction, and Darby's down that way too somewhere. And so Michael's got he's feeling a little more comfortable. He's got his buddy by him, and he closes his eyes for a couple minutes because it's a nice cool evening just to do it. And suddenly he sits bolt upright. Everything quiets down completely. There's no night sounds at all. The moon is gone. It's completely dark, but there hadn't been a cloud in the sky. And the horse has stopped, and Darby is sitting beside him, and they're both staring at what's coming at them. What's coming at them is he says, I saw a large black coach crawl silently alongside us. The coachman and the 6 coal-black horses were draped in black. But that was not terrifying enough. All the horses were headless. The coach quickly came abreast and passed Michael and his friend, the horses were being whipped, but you couldn't hear a sound. You could just see them jolting forward as they're hit. And then they went quickly down from view. Michael went home and helped Darby settle his horse in the field, and then walked the little distance between the two houses and went over to his place to lay down. The next morning, he was still thinking about what he had seen. And as he went out, he said, saw a fella, and he hailed this guy, Daniel Madden, and he said, "Hey, where you going?" In such a rush, because Daniel looked a bit harried. And Daniel yelled, the love of God, don't stop me." And he said, "Why? What's going on?" And he said, "The master has fallen ill. He's close to death." And he pointed down the road, the way the carriage of headless horses had gone. And the only place down there was this mansion house. And he realized that they were on their way to pick him up. I just thought it was a good story. But they don't just happen in Ireland. They don't. There's a story of down in West Virginia about a banshee, and she rode a horse. But I'm going to tell you a story from New York. So this would have been about 1850-ish. And the story goes that in Coho, this little village in New York, the citizens, would go to bed early. It was dark and cool. It was a nice fall night. And everybody was, just kind of turning in, except for one woman. Her night was going to be a vigil. Her husband was dying, and he was in bed. She was sitting with him. And on one hand, she wanted the pain to end. On the other hand, she just wanted to throw herself on top of his emaciated form and beg him to not die, not to leave her alone. She was just in a horrible place. And the story says that, he was barely breathing. She was holding his hand. She could feel it getting colder, and she knew that the moments were passing quickly and he wouldn't be there very much longer. She looked out the window and she heard the rumble of wheels and the clup, clup, clup of horses, and she thought, thank God the doctor's here. Or she had sent a neighbor to go and get the doctor. And she ran to the window, expecting to see the doctor's little carriage. Instead, she saw a dark, closed coach with black, gaping holes where the windows should have been. The shafts where the horses would have stood were up in the air as though attached to the horses, but no horses could be seen. And she could still hear the clump, clump, clump as the coach crunched along the little path down to her house. She knew what it was, for her husband was Irish, and he had told her about the death coaches. He had told her that whenever anyone in his family died, the coach would appear to take them away. She hadn't believed him. She was an American, and such things were foreign to her. But there it was, stopped by the front gate, waiting. She ran back to her husband and grabbed his hand. He opened his eyes and he smiled at her a little, and he whispered, "It is here, isn't it?" She started to sob. He whispered more softly as the breath left him, "I love you." She broke into open tears. She leaned over to kiss him, but his breath was gone. His hand loosened, and outside, the clump, clump, clump went on, and she knew that the horse and the death coach had come for him, much as it had come for all of his relatives before him, both in America and in Ireland. Traditionally, the coaches come with 6 headless horses. But there's interesting stories because there's different variations on it. There is this really cool story about the vanishing doctor. This story took place in 1806. Very similar. There's a man laying in bed. He's dying. His adult sons had sent for a physician. They're standing outside on the steps waiting for the doctor to get there. And they hear the rumble of the wheels and the clump, clump, clump of the horses in the courtyard. They rush down the steps hoping to meet the doctor as he pulls up, and you beg him to hurry, hurry, hurry. Their dad is really in bad shape, but they don't see a coach at all. Nothing's there, just the sound of something coming. And they look out, and the lodge keeper for the mansion house is standing by the gate, and he swings the gate open as though he can see the horses and the carriage that they can't see at all. And after that, the sound comes right up to where they're at, and they can't explain it. Very quickly thereafter comes the doctor, and they rush upstairs with the doctor, and they're not even trying to make sense out of this craziness that just happened because they don't know what to say. And they just wanted Dad to be okay, you know, so they just want the doctor to do something, help him. By the time they get up there, he's already passed away. And the one man says to the doctor, you know, what took you so long? We thought you were here like 20 minutes earlier, but we heard this noise, and he started talking about this invisible carriage, and the doctor says to him, son, I do believe that was the death carriage coming. You see, something like that happened to me. I was on the road, and a sound like a carriage moving and horses walking, slowly got in front of me, and my horse stopped and wouldn't go forward. It was as though I was being held back from getting here so that the carriage could arrive first and take him home. So I wanted to tell a little story about the jack-o'-lantern because we all cut our little pumpkins, and we all, you know, have if we don't cut pumpkins, we have plastic pumpkins with painted faces or something. There's something there all the time. But long before there were painted pumpkins and things like that, there is a story of a man who is the genesis for that particular tradition, we'll say. The story is about a man named Stingy Jack. Now, Stingy Jack was a blacksmith in a little town in Ireland, and he was a deceitful, two-faced schemer. He manipulated people, he cheated them, he was just selfish. He had no kindness. He didn't mind. He would steal from a child as well as an old lady, as well as the priest at the church. He didn't care at all. And word of this guy and his vile reputation made its way to Satan. Now, Satan thought he was a real good candidate because he already didn't have any virtues left. So he thought he'd meet up with that fella and see if he could hasten getting his soul, because he likes to, you know, he collects souls. So one night, Satan pretends to be a dead man laying along the road, and Stingy Jack comes walking by. Now, Stingy Jack, being who he is, he could steal the man's boots or whatever's in his pockets. It's not his problem that this person is dead. So he walks up to the corpse and he begins to pilfer through him, trying to find whatever there was of value. The devil smiled and let it go for a second, and then reached up and grabbed him and showed him his real self. And he said, Stingy Jack, I've been waiting on you. Now, Stingy Jack immediately knew what he was talking about, and he said, you've come to take my soul. And the devil, allowed as that might be true, Stingy Jack said, well, you know, I'm not going to fight you, devil, but I am going to ask you for one thing. Could you let me go to the pub down that way? You can come with me and let me have one more drink before I go with you. And the devil thought, well, you can do that. There's no problem. They went down, but he started drinking. And the devil started drinking. Imagine him drink for drink until they had drank pretty much everything that was in the place. And the devil told him, he said, it's time to go, son. Tally it up and pay the man, and off we'll go. Now, Jack was a smart man. So Jack whispered to the devil, I don't have enough money to pay for this. But you're the devil. You could turn yourself into a gold coin, and we could pay him off handily, and you can just become, you know, a devil again as soon as I walk out of the building. And the devil thought about it, and it was true, he could. So he turned himself into a gold coin. But what he didn't know is that Jack was a smart one. And while they had been talking, Jack always wore a little gold cross, and he had taken it off and shifted it to his pocket. And he plunged that coin down in that pocket right beside that little gold cross. And the devil couldn't get out, couldn't change shape. Now, as long as he was touching that cross. So the devil began to yell. He could hear him. Jack could hear him. And he said, let me out. Get me away from this thing. I want to go. And Jack pulled him and the cross out, and holding them together. And he said, I'll make you a deal, devil. You give me another decade, 1 decade, 10 years. Then I'll go with you peaceful like. So the devil said, anything to get away from this cross. Just stop. So he put the cross back in his pocket, and the devil popped back into his form. And he said, you know, I have to keep my deals. When I sign a deal, I got to keep it. So 10 years from now, I'll be seeing you. Now, old Jack, he knew that the devil meant what he said. 10 years go by, and the devil appears to him as Jack's walking through an old orchard. And Jack says, I clearly promised you I would come with you now, and I will. But let me grab me an apple from up there so that I can take it with me to eat. And the devil said, you can't reach that apple. And he said, I can't, but I bet you could. Devil reached out and plucked that apple, and he handed it to Jack. Jack took his fingernail and he cut a cross on all four sides, and he threw it back at the devil, who caught it just out of instinct. And all of a sudden, he couldn't move. He was stuck. Jack told the devil, he said, now let's make us a new deal. A deal that I will never have to go to hell. Devil said, I don't want you anyway. You're a lying, cheating soul, even more so than most. He said, take the apple out of my hand and I won't let you go to hell. Well, that made Jack happy, and he thought he had it licked. Jack, eventually, like all men, has to die. So he died and he headed up toward heaven, but when he got to the gates of heaven, they turned him away and they said, no one like you can come within these doors. You need to go the other direction. So he walked toward hell. But when he got to the gates of hell, there stood the devil, and he said, I gave you my word I wasn't going to take you in, and I'm not. You need to go back. You'll walk the earth forever. Jack said, what do you mean I'll walk the earth forever? And he said, you'll walk the earth forever. And he said, well, then give me at least a little light so that I can see my way back up there. It's dark on that trail. And the devil picked up one of the tiniest little coals from hell, and he plucked from the ground a turnip, and he cut a little hole in it and he stuck it in. And he said, this is all the light I'll give to you, and this is all of hell you'll get, and you'll get none of heaven. So Jack picked it up and he started back. And they say Jack walks to this day, carrying that turnips with that coal still burning. And on Samhain and Samhain, people they don't want to see him walking by. So they take a turnip, or in this country, a pumpkin, and they put a light in it to let him know they don't want him to walk by. They give him light, so he'll keep on wandering. And they say that old Jack's going to wander until the end of time. So if you wonder why you're carving pumpkins, if you're wondering why you put lights in them and stick them in your window or outside on your porch, it's to make sure Jack doesn't stop. No good is going to happen to you when Jack stops by. And I thought people might like that little story because it's a pretty cool rendition of the reason why they exist. And as I said, spirits wander on All Hallows Eve. In almost every country, there are stories at that time of year. There are some things that are interesting to me because they're almost eternal. They happen everywhere, like, vampires or ghosts or something. Every culture has them. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a Scandinavian spirit. Well, not just a spirit, but Scandinavian spirits. There are these spirits called the Mailangar, and you'll come across them in Norse and Swedish folklore. They are the unbaptized or abandoned children who are left to die in the wilderness. So if a child isn't baptized and they pass away, if a child's abused or neglected, then when they die, their spirits go to the woods. And on nights when the veil is thin, you can hear their crying, wailing sounds. And any passerby or traveler on the road might see or hear them. Their stories are amazingly interesting. They're legion, to be honest. They're childlike apparitions of children or infants, ethereal looking, pale and ghostly, emaciated, sometimes desolate. And these things have tattered clothing or ragged clothing, as though they were forgotten by God in time itself. It is believed their souls are restless and cannot stop. But if you see them, they are crying mostly not for themselves, but for the fact that something is about to happen to you, and they are the last warning before you die. Now, there are other stories where they're vengeful spirits that harm travelers, but most of the time they're warners and mourners about things that are going to come to you. So if you see the Mailingar, the phantom children, understand your time is short. One of the traditions we talk about with Halloween is witchcraft and witches. And there is an old European folklore about something called the wild hunt. Now, the wild hunt is found in some version all over Europe and honestly in the United States as well. As Europeans came here, they brought that stuff with them. So
Okay.
it's not an odd thing to see that happen. So they are usually led by a demigod or some local figure that was well recognized. Sometimes they're led by a female deity that wears this, diaphanous gown, but she's running with these hounds. They're also accompanied by werewolves or large wolves most of the time that are their hunting dogs. They fly through the air. The sound of the dogs ripping through the night. Oftentimes they'll hunt down a human being. That's why you stay in when it's late at night and you can see them. Do you ever hear the story of the song about the ghost rider in the sky? That's what that's referencing. It's a wild hunt, a Western version of it,
Okay.
but a wild hunt. These beings riding across the sky at night, hunting. In 1127, there are some really interesting stories of this that happened. Some monks witnessed a wild hunt, and along with a bunch of the townspeople, these entities, almost 20 feet tall, running along or riding, depending on the figure, with these insane red-eyed devil dogs in the sky through the night, lit by an ethereal light. It had to have been one of the most terrifying things in the world. They were riding on black horses and on goats. These demonic entities are the precursor to the witches flying. And that is where it comes from, a lot of it. And you'll see these paintings in the Middle Ages of like groups of witches dancing in the air. That is a interpretation of the wild hunters. And every culture has them. Some of them say that these werewolves ride with them or run with them. Some say black dogs, hellhounds, what have you. But every culture carries those stories of these demonic entities that ride through the night, these demigods that lead the way. And certain people join the hunt. And if they catch you alone at night and they take you, you join the hunt as well. And you become part of the pack. So beware at night. Beware. Happy Halloween, everybody.
How did Stingy Jack pay his bar bill when the devil turned back from the gold coin into the devil?
Well, I suspect he snuck out because after all, he was a little two-faced fella.
All right, fair enough.